There were a few comments asking how to use or take full advantage of the Umalator. It is crucial for future guides, so we're going to do a detailed walkthrough of it before continuing with anything else. Not everything covered will be required for future guides, but since it is a standalone video, I wanted to cover the Umalator in depth. Any examples we go through will be for Sagittarius Cup, but the principles will be applicable to any Champions Meet. I use the Umalator in 4 cases, and it's generally chronological through the Champions Meet prep process. In order to start my initial plan for a Champions Meet, I check Umalator to see which style-based accelerations sim best on the track. I have a few Umas for each style and distance I would begin considering based on their aptitudes and growth rates. Umalator has an Uma chart to see which uniques are most effective. The Umalator's exact numbers from the chart are very hampered by its limitations, which will be described later. However, the chart does provide a good idea of which uniques will do almost nothing, helping you filter candidates out. Now that I have a general idea of which styles and UMAs I will run, I'm going to check what other skills for them would be effective and use GameTora to see how to get them. This will help me plan out my Legacy UMA, Legacy deck, Borrowed UMA, and Ace deck. We will not go into detail on planning our legacies or decks, as that is out of scope and will be covered in a future video. We are only using the Umalator to identify target skills. I don't do this much anymore, but when I was less comfortable picking out skills myself, I would use the Umalator to test how much her time improved per skill point for each skill. Lastly, when I have trouble deciding between several aces, I like to compare how they sim against each other. Umalator is a good tool to quickly see a side-by-side comparison without spending the time doing multiple trials and practice lobbies, or to break a tie if a lobby testing was inconclusive. Before we get into the details of the Umalator for each use case, we'll want to understand the UI. If you're already comfortable with the UI and just want to improve with more advanced features, I'd recommend skipping to the advanced settings or limitations sections. There are a few forks of the Umalator originally made by Alpha 123. I use and will present Kachi's Umalator. Although part of the UI, reading the charts and stats will be left for the examples. In the center of the screen, we have a representation of the specific track selected. The two most important pieces of the representation are the terrain level and track shape. Power will affect the speed coefficient on uphills, and wit will trigger speed up mode on downhills. The location of them will have an effect on their importance, but for now, total length provides a good estimate. The track shape around where the final leg starts will determine which accelerations are effective and define the meta. Stat thresholds are the secret stat categories that will give you a speed boost for every 300 rounded up in that stat after mood adjustments. The bonus is 5% per 300 if only one category, like speed in Leo Cup, or 2.5% per 300 if there are two, like stamina and guts in Sagittarius Cup. It is also possible to have none, like Scorpio Cup. Directly underneath the map, you can select the track or modify any of the starting conditions. Depending on when you use the Umalator, the current and any previous CMs will be available as a preset in the column on the right. Just above that is a copy link. This lets you store or send the exact settings of the Umalator, including the selected Umas and their abilities. I find this feature useful for having a base setup for the current CM, storing my current high roll of each ace, and sharing any of my Umas with someone else for them to compare with. There are 3 operating modes: Compare, Skill Chart, and Uma Chart. Compare will tell you the difference between UMA 1 and 2, which are filled in on the left column. It will also provide advanced statistics including spurt rate, survival rate, finish length distribution, and skill activation timing. Skill chart will give you a table that contains how any single skill will affect the minimum, maximum, mean, and median of UMA 1's finish lengths. Similarly, UMA chart will provide the same chart for the full, non-inherited unique skills. Skill in UMA chart will only use the stats and skills of UMA 1 as their reference, and UMA 2 will have no influence. The left UMA panel is where you will enter the planned or existing UMA's stats and skills. It takes a while to get comfortable estimating the stats, so I would recommend initially just copying a veteran UMA of that distance and style. For Champions Meet planning, I would set mood to normal to prevent understamming on an awful mood roll in rounds 1 or 2. The reset button will quickly restore default settings for that UMA for use in a different context. Reset All will reset UMA's 1 and 2 and any virtual pacemakers that have been set. Virtual pacemakers are an advanced setting and I would not recommend their use initially, but they will provide a more accurate simulation. Expanding the UMA panel from the arrow in the top right provides the ability to quickly copy UMA's 1 and 2 using the upper two buttons, or swap them with the bottom one. Here are a few recommendations on the more advanced settings. Generally, the defaults are excellent. Leave number of samples at 500. This is a reasonable trade-off between minimizing the variances and the time required to execute the simulations. Click the dice to re-randomize the seed if the sim isn't as you expected, just to ensure the seed is not somehow responsible. You can also use seed randomize to resimulate the race if wanting to analyze one sample run at a time. Never turn pacemaker to none and keep the virtual pacemaker at approximate for now. As you get more comfortable with the Umalator, you may want to more accurately simulate pace. Approximate pacemakers are good enough, but they are only regular fronts, so I would use virtual pacemaker to simulate a runaway if they are common. Keep sync RNG off. This will let UMAs 1 and 2 activate their skills independently, therefore at different locations, or even having one fail their activation wit check. Keep skill wit checks on, which will require the simulated UMAs to pass a wit check before using a skill. It will follow the in-game formula of 100 minus 9000 divided by wit to provide a better estimate of ability effectiveness given the UMA's wit. Keep rushed on, which will enable HP reductions from the simulated UMA getting rushed from failing a wit check. These two settings will increase the effective wit in the simulation to better match the in-game value. I recommend turning on Show HP, which will let you see when and by how much HP is consumed or restored over the race. Umalator is not without its faults as a simulator. There are several limitations which you'll need to consider when using it to evaluate plans or exact UMAs. Advanced skill activation conditions are not always accurate, particularly blocked or exact positions at a point in time. The image shows that Redshift, which requires being in the top 5, is activating sooner than Let's Pump, which requires 6th. This situation could occasionally happen in game, but it certainly isn't the average case that Umalator shows. Combinations of skills are not evaluated, only a single marginal skill is. As an example, groundwork is essential to a frontrunner, but Umulator will show it worth 0 lengths until enough green skills are chosen, then it will show groundwork's true value of approximately 2 lengths. Skills cooldowns are not implemented, so the value of these particular skills, such as Professor of Curvature, can be undervalued. If you're planning further ahead, upcoming UMAs or their strong uniques may not be implemented yet, like Valentine Mahono Bourbon. There are two ways to force the location of a skill activation. You can open the skill and type the position in meters. Alternatively, after executing a compare, you can drag an instance of the skill on the map. The main use of forced location would be to force positional chained accelerations to activate properly in sequence. An example would be from Scorpio with a late surger. The default would use limited positional estimations and mainly follow the other conditions. This would have Redshift activate on the final corner, Let's Pump on a corner late race, and shooting for victory on the second half of the final corner. A more common case would be to chain the accelerations from their positional requirements. Well on the final corner, trigger Let's Pump at 6th, accelerating into 5th, triggering Redshift, and accelerating into 4th, triggering Shooting for Victory. Seeing which accels perform best on this track will give you an idea of what the meta might be. From that, you can pick your UMAs which will best fit in this meta. Alternatively, if you're an Oshi player, you can start thinking of how to play around the meta. This might mean changing your Oshi's style or creating a support UMA that denies the win conditions of the strongest styles instead of trying to take advantage of them. After repeating the skill chart for every position, we can see the most powerful neutral skills. This will be the best predictor for the meta outside of the actual CM lobbies. These are generally going to be accelerations, and for Sagittarius, they are angling and scheming and taking the lead for fronts. Let's pump some iron and moving past and beyond for backliners, and additionally encroaching shadow for end closers. Therefore, after a general review, we'll expect to see backliners, mainly end closers, be the majority, but frontrunners as competitive. This can be warped by exceptionally powerful UMAs such as Christmas Ogre in Pace. Now that we identified frontrunner as one of the better styles, we will pick out a few candidates based on growth rates, innate skills, natural aptitudes, and Oshiness. OG Red Maru was a very strong frontrunner in Scorpio, so we might have her on our candidate list for fronts to run in Sagittarius. We're going to look at the value of her unique skill in Sagittarius as a frontrunner using the Uma chart. We can quickly see that her unique skill actually has 0 value. Redshift is a point 4 acceleration that requires you to be in the top 5 on the final corner. Since it is an accel, it only has value in the late race during the acceleration phase. We can see where this is simulated to happen, and the final corner is too deep in the late race to hold any value for an acceleration ability. Similarly, for an end closer candidate, Goldship has been a top tier UMA in any end closer cup. We can see that it is a mid-race velocity increase when at the back. We can also see that the velocity increase always has the same amount of value. Based on where some skills activate, they can reach into the late race for carryover value. For accelerations, it will mean instant acceleration like Red Maru was on Scorpio. For velocity increases, it will mean you are going into the late race at a higher than normal speed, so there is less acceleration required to hit the late race top speed. Bountiful Harvest is an example of what velocity carryover looks like on the graph. There is a standard amount of value at the start of the proc, where it is wholly contained in the mid-race, increased value when it gets perfect carryover, almost 0 value at the start of the late race, where most of the velocity increase is wasted during the acceleration phase, and back to a relatively standard amount of value when it is wholly in the late race. Now that we have decided on one of our aces being Goldship, we're going to start planning which skills we may want her to have. Skill chart has the same details and graph available for each skill in the same way that Uma chart does. Once you have a good knowledge of the skills, this will get quicker, but as an example, we'll run through a quick analysis of the top 5 skills by median. We'll open each ability in Game Tour's skill list to get detailed information, including sources of the skill. For Encroaching Shadow, it is only available directly on Narita Taishin since it is a gold skill. This means that despite how effective it would be on Goldship, we have no way to include it in our skill build. We'll take a quick look at its skill profile to learn a couple things. Since all 4 numerical values are similar, we know that assuming the activation conditions are met, Encroaching Shadow will basically always have the same effectiveness. Let's Pump Some Iron is Medro Ryan's unique. This will be the inherited version. As a general idea, a unique is inherited effectively if the inherited version is over 50% effect value of the non-inherited. Less than 35% will be weak, and between that may be okay. Let's Pump is over 50% as an inherited skill, so it's still effective to have Ryan as a parent candidate. Similarly, Moving Past and Beyond is Metro Dober's unique and has over 50% effectiveness, so we'll also have Dober as a parent candidate. Straightaway Spurt is a white skill, so we could use inheritances, or it is available on several support cards by hint or event. Generally for an ace, you want to use either the strongest stat cards available on your account, or cards that provide an irreplaceable gold skill. As a white skill, this means we would ideally inherit Straightaway Spurt. Super Stand is an Agnes Digital only skill at this point, but has a different skill profile than the others. It has a minimum of 0.00 lengths, so that means this ability has the potential to be fully wasted, a maximum of 3.73, so it has high potential, and the mean and median are fairly close, so in most races you can expect a little over a length improvement. With the mean and median together and slightly closer to the minimum, a low roll is more likely than a high one, but a middling roll will happen most of the time. We're going to test what happens when we start adding skills to Goldship and its impact on the skill chart. We plan on having Ryan and Dober as 2 parents, so we'll add their inherited uniques and rerun the skill chart. Any skill you add to the UMA may change the value of any other skill. We can see the value of Encroaching Shadow and Straightaway Spurt has dropped due to acceleration having diminishing returns. If 2 acceleration abilities already get us to top speed, then the next acceleration skills helps us get there slightly faster, but also means the end of our accelerations will be wasted. This is how you can test a total skill build plan, but even this is subject to the Umalator's limitations, primarily the skill activation conditions. However, as you know in practice, you won't always get offered the skills you plan on, or you could get deep discounts on other skills, pushing them into becoming great. When we complete a run, we can use the Umalator to help pick out skills based on the hint levels and skill points we have available. I'm only going to go through a couple skills for each category. As you get more experienced, the number of skills you need to test will be reduced as you will start to form a general idea of how cost efficient any single skill is, and eventually this step as a whole may even become unnecessary. First, we'll buy our must-have skills. This will include accelerations or enabling skills like green skills for groundwork or recoveries for activating a unique. For my end closer gold ship for Sagittarius, the skills I consider part of this category are Moving Past and Beyond, Let's Pump Some Iron, Nimble Navigator, and Straightaway Spurt. Next, we're going to put our stats and initial skills into the Umalator and compare. The first Umalator assisted step will be our survivability. We're going to look at the spurt rate of Uma 1 and are targeting a rate of 90 to 95%. We have 81.2% spurt, so we'll want extra survivability through applicable stamina or guts green skills or recovery skills. Our options are Standing By at 180, Go Home Specialist at 323, and After School Stroll at 153. We're going to add each skill individually and test what the new spurt rate is. We're looking for the most affordable option to get our Uma's survivability in that comfortable range. Our spurt rate is good with only a single white recovery, therefore After School Stroll would be our best option. However, the longer the race is, the more important the survival rate becomes, as there is more time that other Umas can catch up while yours has run out of HP. I would probably aim for over 75% for longs, over 65% for mediums, over 50% for miles, and 40% for sprints. This leads to Go Home Specialist being the most affordable option to meet survivability criteria. Now that we've added our must-haves and survivability, we'll start comparing the extra skills that can push our Uma from good to great. We'll test each individual skill to see how the lengths change. Generally, we'd want to focus on median, so the ace is consistent and able to win most races. Alternatively, we may want to focus on mean lengths when we are willing to have a strong race cancel out 2 or more weak races. This will happen in 2 cases. Either it is a gambler ace, or you believe that your account is weak enough that improving mean will only lead to losing by less instead of becoming a win. Since gold ship most likely falls into the consistent category, we'll take the median lengths improved and divide that by the post-hint skill cost in-game, and that'll be our skill point efficiency. We will repeat this for every skill, remember to include double circle abilities, and ultimately we'll pick the best combination that fits under our skill point budget. You may also need to retest spurt and survival rate, since velocity and acceleration skills will reduce survivability. The last use of the Umalator is the most common, comparing two Umas. You'll find the simulation most accurate if they are the same Uma or at least share the same style. These are 2 candidate gold chip runs I've made with different deck styles. One was power-based and the other was wit-based. Both were pretty average in terms of trainings and overall run luck, so I wanted to see which the Umalator thought was a better candidate for my final ace deck. First and most importantly, we'll look at the spurt rates, as an Uma that does not spurt has no chance of winning. Regardless of distance, you'll want 90 to 95%. Lower may be considered in a multi-ace setup if you want to trade it for a higher top end, but I wouldn't recommend it. Both these gold chips are very similar, as spurt rate matters more than survival, but the higher survival rate does give Uma 2 a very slight advantage. If both Umas are reasonably equal in survivability, the fastest conclusion can be drawn from mean and median. A negative number means Uma 1 is better, and a positive number means 2 is better. If they are running the same style, a mean and median difference of greater than 1 length is not worth considering further. The 0.63 and 0.75 differences seen here mean that Uma 1 is heavily favored, but some other factors could be considered. Most of the details here are based on the representative run from the sample that will be displayed on the map. The representative can be changed by clicking on the minimum, maximum, mean, or median to see what the skill activations were like to cause that situation. Rerunning on the same seed will provide the same graphs and charts, but using a new seed can create new representatives to choose from. The most important detail will be time to finish, which can be compared across simulations with the caveat of being pace dependent. Next most important will be the location of skill activations, although this is better observed graphically on the map. I don't typically use spot struggle frequency, dueling frequency, or rushed frequency. However, these could be used to estimate marginal improvement from guts or wit. Minimum will be the high roll of Uma 1 versus the low roll of Uma 2, and maximum will be the opposite. This may be a consideration for gamblers where the main concern isn't how they perform on average, but instead want their high roll to be a guaranteed win. We are not looking at the length differences, but will need to click on them to change the representative runs. We will be comparing the time to finish of UMA 1 under minimum and UMA 2 under maximum. For this example, UMA 1 has a better high roll potential with a shortest finish time of 2 minutes and 24.825 seconds compared to UMA 2's best time of 2 minutes and 25.14 seconds. The lengths UMA 2 wins by is higher on its high roll despite the slower finish time because the low roll of UMA 1 is lower than UMA 2. If we really wanted to control for this, we could increase samples and use a third-party UMA so they would be compared against the same average low roll. This chart is how all the sample races ended in favor of which UMA by however many lengths. The key takeaways are in the distribution of the chart. In a unimodal or one peak shape, the aces will be pretty evenly matched and mean will be a good representation of which UMA is better. In a bimodal or two peak shape, the aces will be dependent on one or two key skills, and the entire race is dependent on if they hit those skills. In the bimodal shape for a gambler, you might only care about how many races end with a certain length difference. Any other finishes might not matter because in practice they would be a lose by less lengths instead of win. Stamina charts are available for both UMA 1 and UMA 2. It essentially tells you how punishing the spurt and survival rates will be. However, this is largely accounted for in the rates above, the mean and median, and the length distributions chart. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful for your champion meet preparations. I wish you all the luck in them, and remember, build with what you have, not what others do.